Caminiti.
Here.
Mr. DeFranco.
Here.
Mr. Donlin.
Here.
Mr. Dymo. Mr. Little. Mrs. Minuis.
Here.
Mrs. Wright.
Here.
Mrs. Stella.
Here.
Mrs. Rogers.
Here.
I need a motion to go into executive session.
We have one item. That's the finance item.
Okay. I need a motion to approve A1.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I need a motion to go into executive session for health insurance broker discussion and interview.
So moved. Seconded.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? This meeting will now come. Adequate notice of this meeting was provided by sending such notice to the Asbury Park Press, the Middletown Patch, and the Middletown Township Public School District website, and the posting of such notice at the August T. Minor administrative offices at each elementary, middle, and secondary school in the district. Roll call.
Mrs. Caminiti.
Here.
Mr. DeFranco. Mr. Donlin.
Here.
Mr. Dymo. Mr. Little.
Here.
Mrs. Minuis.
Here.
Mrs. Wright.
Here.
Mrs. Stella.
Here.
Mrs. Rogers.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, school community, staff, parents, administration. Thank you all for coming tonight. Just to give everybody an idea about what we're going to, as we dive a little deeper in our second budget meeting tonight, we're going to go, last time we talked at about 80,000 foot of what the drivers were for our budget and what that looked like. And as we drill down tonight into departments and give additional information, I would ask that you allow the administrative team the opportunity to present the budget. We're absolutely going to make sure we have time for question and answer at the end. But if we can present it in a way that we might answer your question a little bit later, please bear with us and give us the opportunity to do that. And then we're going to welcome all questions, and of course from our public after that. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Doherty, our business administrator.
Thank you. Not sure if this is working here.
Want me to go do that?
Yeah, I don't know if this is reaching over there. Well, thank you all for coming. As Dr. George said, this is our second budget workshop meeting. Last week we gave an overview of the environment and the factors that we have to take into account while we're doing this year's or next year's budget compilation. And this week we're going to be talking more specifically about the various areas that comprise our budget and the significant components and drivers of those costs, and I'll give you some more detail on that. So the first thing we wanted to start off with, and it's up on the screen now, is what is actually part of our official budget that goes to the state. And it's the New Jersey Department of Education Budget Statement and Priorities. And all of these items that are listed here, all of these areas that are listed here, are areas that are looked at when the Department of Education, through the county superintendent, reviews our budget. And they look to see that we're addressing all these areas appropriately before they will approve our budget. And we have to have our budget approved by the Department of Education before we can move forward, and the board can approve it and adopt it as our final budget. So this just gives you an idea of the different areas that we look at. So we need to take this into account, make sure that our budget is addressing all these areas. The next slide that we have, and I'm going to stress, and it is up there in yellow, that this is a draft of what we are working on at this particular point in time, February 5th. February 5th is actually still a few months away from when we have to finalize our budget. So what we're going to be presenting this evening is what we know and what we are looking at this point in time. Everything is subject to change and continual review. But we wanted to give the board and the public an idea of where things stand at this point. So this slide captures our projected revenue. Now, the projected revenue that we have up here, and you'll note that there's a note at the top, all of these numbers would go under the assumption that we would be utilizing our available banked tax levy cap, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which would actually allow us to raise our tax levy above the 2% because we had a previous year that we were below 2%. But the revenue for that is captured in here at this point in time to show you what it would look like with that levy included. So this totals down in our tax levy, the state aid. We have our estimated reduction based upon the implementation of S2, which I think you should all be aware of, and that was the legislation that was put into effect back in 2018 to reallocate state aid amongst all the school districts in New Jersey. Some districts ended up getting more state aid, some got less, and unfortunately Middletown is one of the districts that got less. And we've been talking about that. If you want more information on that, that was also in our last week's presentation. But we're estimating that we will have a reduction of a little over $850,000 for this year. Extraordinary aid, we're projecting as level. Last year's award was $1,700,000. This is something that, unfortunately, we never know what the revenue is going to be for a particular budget year until after the year is closed. For example, our 2018-2019 award, we didn't find out until July of 2019. Our year ends June 30th. So we can only put an estimate in here. If we overestimate, then we'll be short that revenue. So normally with all things related to grants that we don't have exact numbers on, we try to be somewhat conservative, but not too conservative. So we're budgeting $1.5 million that we receive for that. Fund balance, we have no excess surplus to put toward the budget for the upcoming year, so that remains a zero as it is in the current year. We do have some other sources of revenue. We're budgeting that at $1 million, projecting that at $1 million for next year. That would include things such as tuition is paid to us by other districts. We do accept some students in our special ed programs where we have room and it's appropriate. We have facility rentals, we have tuition from preschool, we have some other sources of revenue that are captured here, and we're projecting that that would approximate $1 million. We have money here that we're showing from capital reserve. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's money that we have in a reserve account that can be used specifically for capital projects. It can't just be used for general budget expenditures, so it would depend upon what we're doing for capital projects, how much money we could take in from that. Federal aid semi, that's our Medicaid reimbursement that we file for from the state. Well, it's actually federal money, but we go through the state. We are required to do that. We have certain services we provide here in the district that are Medicaid eligible, and we file those, we make those claims, and essentially what happens is we get back about 1/3 of the cost, and the state gets the other 2/3 of the cost. So we're required to participate in this program, and we are actually told by the state how much we need to budget for that. They give us a minimum. We normally exceed the minimums. For this year, we are a little bit behind on that, so we're monitoring it, but we are told what number to budget there. And transportation fees, we'll talk about in a little more detail later, but this is revenue that we have been generating by sharing routes with other districts when we can, not our regular home school routes, but some of the out-of-district routes. And again, I'll explain that a little bit further later, but essentially will help to defray some of our transportation costs when we can do that. So we're estimating revenue on that at about $800,000. So that brings us down to a total revenue number projected at this point of about $167,565,000. The next couple of slides are showing what our budgeted or projected expenses are overall based on some broad categories, and we'll go into some more detail later in the presentation, but we have captured them all similar to what you would see on our department event budget, our user-friendly budget, so that it would look familiar. So if we go down the list, we have regular programs and instruction, and all of these numbers include salaries, supplies, services, all of the different categories of expenses that go into these areas. So if you can, I'm not going to read each number aloud, obviously, but we've gone through and projected what we thought the expenses will be for 2021 and showed you what the change in dollars and the change in percentages. And we're going to talk about some of these specific areas later in the presentation, but this will just give you an overview. So if you turn to the next slide, that continues the rest of that overview of the budget. And you can see down at the bottom of the second column where it says 2021, our total budgeted projected expenses at this point are $170,122,000. So going to the next page, obviously those two numbers I just read to you, the revenue and the expenses, were not the same. So this shows where, what our shortfall is at this point between our projected revenue and our projected appropriations. And it's approximately $2.5 million, which represents about 1.5% of our projected expenses for next year. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, 1.5%, but $2.5 million obviously is a significant number for us to address in order to get this budget finalized and balanced and able to be approved. But if we did not use, and again, I'll remind everybody that we did use in our revenue projection the $1,059,000 of bank cap that we have available to us. If we weren't using that, the actual shortfall would be $3.6 million. So just to keep that in perspective. So the next few slides will show you some trends in the revenue. Our tax levy increases, we had shown a similar chart last year and we extended it for this year. Going back to 2004, 2005, when there was no cap on the tax levy, or it was a higher cap, and the tax levy was approaching 6% in the increase. And as you can see, it made a steady decline all the way back down to I think it was in 2011, the 2010-11 budget, they instituted the 2% cap. So we reached 2% there, and then there were years subsequent to that that we were below the 2%. And we did generate quite a bit of this bank tax levy cap that I've been talking about. Most of the tax levy cap that we generated in those years, the district never utilized, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But then we were at 2% for a few years. We did utilize some of the bank cap we had available to us, where you see it spike up, to 3+%. Then since then it has gone back down, and we were below 2% in 18-19, and the current year's budget we included a 2% increase. So the next slide talks more about this bank tax levy cap. We have generated since the 11-12 year budget year over $8 million in bank tax levy cap. We have let 4.6 of that expire. We never used that in any budget, so that's not available to us at this point. We did, in the 1 year that we just spoke about, use about $2.4 million of that utilized bank cap to fund items in the budget for that year. And right now, we currently have available the $1,059,000 we've been talking about. But what we've also done is, in previous discussions that we've talked with the board and the public, the cumulative effect of all this unused bank tax levy cap that we did not use over the course of time is in excess of $45 million, because if those monies had been included in the original year that they were able to be included, if we hadn't been below 2% and we had gone to a full tax levy, that would have been in the tax levy and then built upon that year after year with the increases. So, this is revenue that the district never collected and will not collect. And, there are two ways to look at it. One would be that, we saved, the taxpayers here in Middletown $45 million that they did not have to fund. The other way to look at it is we've lost that purchasing power going forward to fund our budget. And that is also something the state is looking at as well. We talked last week about our state aid and how we're looked at as, over adequacy and so forth. And the fact that the state is looking at Middletown as not being at the level of local fair share that they could be, and we're, about $20 million short. So not that it's recommended that we be that much higher, but these are all things that, come into play when the state is looking at what our funding is and looking at, how to allocate the funds among districts. So, can you go to the next slide? So this chart shows you what our state aid has been since 2010-11. We did have that cut. I don't know how many of you remember. It's getting further and further away now, but there was a large cut in state aid for the 11-12 budget year. And we were cut, we used to be funded over $20 million in state aid, and we were cut back down to, somewhere around $12-13 million, I believe, for that year. It was a dramatic loss in state aid. After that time, we did regain some of that back. You can see the line trending upward. And then we remained relatively flat for a while, maybe getting small increases or no increases, until the implementation of this S2, which now is reallocating state aid, and now we're back down on the decline. And we are this will be, next year's budget will be the third year of implementation of S2, so it'll be the third year that we're losing additional aid. The next slide talks about our capital and maintenance reserves. These are the only monies that we have available outside of the current year's operating budget to fund anything within the district. So we have two reserve accounts, capital and maintenance. I'll talk about the maintenance reserve first. The maintenance reserve we established in 2011. At the end of that budget year, we did have some monies available that we had saved out of that budget that we did not utilize. So we put it in a maintenance reserve that was $1 million. We have not made any deposits into that reserve since then, but we have had some drawdowns when we've had large unexpected facilities items that we've had to fund that we've needed additional funds for, and we've taken some withdrawals out of that. At this point, we have a little over $500,000 left in that account. We have been talking to the board over the past several weeks about some things that we may need to look at taking funding out of this account for the current year, some HVAC issues that we're having. So at this point, that money is available, but that is all we have available. Capital reserve, that we've actually funded and used sort of, as put it in, put it out, or spend it over the last several years. When we have monies available in a budget that we've been able to save, we will move money into capital reserve to save that for a project in the future. But we have not built up a large balance there. Essentially, the monies that we've put in, we have expended for projects around the district. At this point, at the end of the last fiscal year, June 30th, 2019, we had about $1.5 million in that capital reserve. We did budget to use about $140,000 of it this current year. We are looking to allocate some of that toward next year's budget. The amount that we allocate is going to be dependent upon what projects are in the budget that would be eligible for that. So we cannot use this money to just fund the general operating expenses in our budget, but if we have certain capital projects that we're doing, we can use that money to fund it. So that, we don't know exactly how much we're going to be using. That's changing as we adjust our capital project plan, but that's what that money is for. So, whatever we use in this year's budget, then the remaining balance will be whatever's left over to use for future projects. But the note at the bottom tells you what because sometimes we're asked, well, how much money are you allowed to have in these reserves? And as you can see by the numbers at the bottom, we are nowhere near the limits that we are allowed to have for a district of our size and the amount of buildings we have and the amount of money we have in our budget. So, the next few slides talk about grant funding, so I'm going to turn that over to Mrs. Alphone.
No. Oh, this one. No, probably power. Good evening. Oh,
That's a nice introduction for them.
It's working now. So I'm going to talk to you about the grant money that we receive from the federal government. This money is considered supplemental to any district operating budget that we have. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the allocations that we do receive, or that we did receive this year, the projections for next year, and also some of the things we do use them for. I have to say that in all of these titles, we do receive through 4 titles, this year 5, but I'll talk about that exception in a minute. There are restrictions on spending. There's very tight regulations that control what the allocations can be used for. So we receive federal money through Title I, Title II, Title III, Title III Immigrant, and Title IV. We have also received in the past 3 years Title I SIA, which is a school improvement allocation, and that was specifically for Bayshore Middle School, as they were deemed a targeted school for their performance on standardized test results 3 years ago. The state at that time was dedicated to providing improvement funds for a continuous 3-year cycle. After we did gain targeted status, we came out of that status the next year, but we still were able to reap the benefits of those funds through this school year. So that, you'll see, is not an eligible fund for us next year. So just to kind of demonstrate that that is something that we've been receiving but will not receive in the future. Title I is for our economically disadvantaged population. We receive, this year we received a little over $500,000 in Title I funding. We always project, as Mrs. Doherty said, we always project very modestly, but not so modest that we're in a place where we're not planning efficiently for spending. So under the ESSA guidelines, they always guide you to project about 85% of your funds of what you receive this year for the following school year. So you'll see the second column is actually the 85% projection for all of the title grants. So for Title I, we are considered a targeted a targeted district. Only certain schools within our population qualify based on their poverty levels, and that's based on the number of free and reduced lunch students in those populations as compared to the district poverty rate. Title I funds are the most unique funds and the most specified funds because targeted funds are only allowable to use to the individual student that qualifies based on their economic status. So even if a school is deemed a Title I school, because we are targeted, we are only allowed to use those funds for certain students within those schools who qualify. The thresholds are, as I said, economic need, but also academic or social emotional need. We do have the ability to potentially apply for a waiver if we have schools that fall close to the 40% poverty line, which is the threshold for tripping into what is known as school-wide status. We do examine that year after year to see if any of our schools qualify, and there is potential for us to actually apply for a waiver for next year for certain populations. And we're gonna exhaust those efforts because it is more efficient to be able to use your funds for all the population in the school. Some of the things we use Title I for historically, and also this year, we have funded a portion of our reading development teachers and our math specialist salaries because they spend a portion of their time working with our Title I identified students in intervention settings. That has been, a way that we have used a bulk of those funds through salaries. We also are required under ESSA and Title I to have a mandatory set-aside for parent and family engagement and also for homeless and neglected students. So that is money that comes right off the top and they're set aside for those specified purposes. Title I SIA, as I said, that is expiring for us this year. We did receive a little over $19,000 for this school year. We started at 60 and had a steady decline over the course of 3 years. I think the state kind of overshot what they were, giving districts and had to manage that back a little bit, but we've been able to do some really great things for Bayshore. We have run a large-scale responsive classroom pilot for the middle school through that funding. We've also sent a lot of their staff members for data analysis professional development to support the work of their learning design teams. And we are also starting an e-gaming initiative at Bayshore. So to capitalize on the social, emotional components of students within the learning environment. So, but again, that money will be expiring for next year, so it will not be reflected in the total projections. Title II is staff PD. We received this year a little over $150,000. We're projected next year for about $135,000. And we have run a multitude of things through this fund this year. We launched our responsive classroom initiative at the elementary level successfully, and that was a large ticket item that was funded through that grant. We've also funded our learning design team initiative. We have math committees that are working on professional development for what is a potential rollout of next year's new program, which you'll hear a little bit more about later from Dr. Kerrigan. We've also had PD for literacy initiatives and, again, data analysis at large to support the work of our learning design teams. Title III is also a grant we receive, and that's for our ELL population, our English language learners. We received this year about $11,000, and next year projected just short of $10,000. This year, we predominantly use this to support the supplies and materials for our ESL program. We do also use it to SIOP train, which is Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It's a instructional methodology specified for English language learners. And because we apply for a bilingual waiver to support our Spanish-speaking students, we're required under the regulation to train teachers in the SIOP model. So we defray the cost of that training through Title III funding. We've also provided our ESL staff members and staff members with ESL students within their classrooms additional supports through professional development. Our Title III immigrant money is a little bit different because that has to do with English speakers who are coming into our country as newcomers. So they are students that are in the country for less than 2 years, and they qualify for funds to be applied to educational supports through Title III immigrants. And again, we use that predominantly for material supplies. We can even use it for family outreach because if students are new to the country, we're assuming that their family members are as well. And we also, again, professional development for ESL staff members. Title IV is the last federal grant we receive, and this is actually probably the most flexible out of all the grants in regards to spending and what it can particularly be used for. The title deems it as extraordinary educational opportunities. This year we received $34,000. Next year we're projected to be about $28,000. This is the major funding source for our Gifted and Talented program. All of the materials and supplies that are needed to facilitate that program come out of that grant fund. We've also, at the high school level, put in a restorative justice module for both North and South, which has been very successful. It's an online module. We also funded our global education initiative this year through Title IV, and we were also able to expand our AP summer program to offer the introduction courses through that title fund. So as you can see, the bottom portion talks about what we received this year, inclusive of the SIA Title I, what our projection is for next year, less the Title I SIA fund, and projected out to be 85%. And that's kind of the overview. The most important thing is that anything we fund out of these 4 titles has to be above and beyond the threshold of what the district would have funded. It's supplemental. It cannot supplant district funds. There are more nuances to that, but that's the most simplistic way to provide that information.
And we're currently having ongoing discussions with the building principals of our Title I schools.
Here.
To determine if there is more effective ways we can be utilizing the majority of that money because it does sit in Title I and Title II, which allows us to fund salaries of employees that service those students, those identified students in those schools. So we are talking about analyzing our school achievement data in our Title I schools where we know that we're not meeting the targets projected by the state for student achievement, as we've discussed in previous meetings, and thinking about maybe considering alternate ways of providing supports and programs for those students to try to improve that performance.
How many schools are projected to meet that minimum threshold?
This year we have 6 elementaries and 2 middle schools. We also have elementary schools that kind of bounce in and out, so sometimes we pick up a 7th. It's really dependent on, so what you do to find who is eligible, you take the entire district population and the entire district population of free and reduced lunch, and you look at the proportionality in each building, and then that proportionality is rank ordered, and it's compared against what the state poverty threshold would be. So qualification usually hovers around 11% poverty rate.
So we're pretty confident looking at this year's numbers and making projections on where those students will reside next year, that we're not going to see much change in the designations amongst our schools.
So moving on to some other significant components of our budget. Obviously, the biggest component of our budget is salaries and benefits. And this slide shows you a breakdown between those categories and gives you some idea of, how much of that is included in our budget. So if you look at the salaries line, for 1920, our current year, the budget for salaries in total is a little over $102 million. Projecting it out for what we'll need in 2021, we are coming up with $104,765,000, a change of a little over $2.4 million. This represents about a 2.4% increase. Our average bargaining unit increases or raises that we are contractually obligated to honor is around 3%. There has been also some reallocation of substitute costs to purchase services. We've been using a company to provide us with our substitutes for teachers and paraprofessionals and some secretarial. So there has been also some movement of those costs out of salaries to purchase services, which you'll see later in the budget. But this also does not include any staffing changes at this point. So this is the way it stands right now. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we are still in the process of constructing the budget, so this may change. Employee benefits, primarily that's health insurance, but it also includes pension, workers' compensation, social security, things of that nature. Our current budget is $24,795,000. We're projecting $26,203,000 for next year, about a $1.4 million increase. Right now, we have an increase built in of about $1.4 million for our health insurance for next year, which would be approximately 7.6% increase in that area. This is an area that we do not have, we normally don't have solid numbers on until later in the process, more toward the spring. Sometimes we don't know for exactly what it's going to be even before we have to finalize our budget. Some years we do. But what we do is we work with our broker and our consultant to get updated estimates to use for our budget to include in our projections, and as that information gets better, we update our budget projection and make adjustments accordingly. So our total salaries and benefits going up year over year about $3.8 million in comparison to the increase in our general fund budget that we're looking at right now of about $6.4 million. So the increase in the salaries and benefits is basically driving about 60% of the total increase in the budget that we're looking at this point. And in total, salaries and benefits represents about 77% of our entire general budget. salaries are included in most of these categories.
Okay, so would we safe to say that 104 million or?
Is included in regular programs instruction, special ed instruction, it's included in co-curricular, not tuition. But most of these categories do have a salary component.
And what would be this is kind of the total better than that, or so what else would be in those components? How do you overlay these to the salary components? I'm guessing there's other components in
In
the
the
appropriations page.
yeah, oh yes, I mean, that's the supplies, purchase services, equipment, yes, there's other things, and you'll see a little bit more as we go through some of the areas, but yeah, I mean, obviously we pay for more salaries. There's
Right, what I'm saying
items
is like
in
this
here.
appropriations page doesn't come out to the 170, unless I'm looking wrong. It doesn't come out to 170 million, so I'm just trying to say, this breakout versus now we're looking at the different components, we're trying to figure out, it's like transportation not near that line, some doesn't tie up.
Right, yes.
I think I lost my page.
There's
Oh, is it-
another
is it
page that
carryover?
carries
Okay.
over, yeah.
So we've got to remove that. I think this page. Oh, my pages are. I got you. But no, that's still.
Are you looking at, well, the 170 million is on the appropriation. The revenue page only has 167 million on it. It does, it agrees to this number here.
Yeah, sorry, the pages.
That's okay.
Are we good?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So right now, we're in the process of, changing possibly healthcare provider, to be brokers, and we're talking about savings. So would that then change when we switch over?
If we realize savings, if we
Yeah, I mean-
realize savings in our, either way, we
I
normally.
mean, that's why we're doing this.
Well, and also, like I was explaining earlier, we get budgeted estimates early in December. And those get updated, and even in prior years when we haven't made any changes, the estimates get refined and made better over the course of the budget cycle. So we normally do break this number down in the course of constructing the budget. We just don't know where it's gonna land. What our consultant will do is give us an estimate that we could use that we shouldn't be exceeding. And so that, the last thing somebody wants to do is give you a number in December and say, this is gonna be your increase, and then when they actually negotiate or we actually, get final numbers, it's significantly higher. So we do, as we get better estimates, we lower this number. We did that last year. We started with a number in December, we got lower, and we were able to adjust the budget based on that. So this is where we stand at this point with a December estimate of what it would cost us to do a fully insured plan for next year. Now, this is February, if we have, I'm sure we can get updated numbers soon on what that would be, depending upon what course we take.
Okay.
But yes, that's not included in.
Okay.
So moving on to the next page, we just wanted to recap for everyone the reductions that we made in personnel since July of 2018. And that is, if you remember, in July, we had to adjust our budget because the state aid changed that year for the 18-19 budget. We were given an allocation in March, and the state came back and implemented this S2, and our allocation actually dropped by almost $1.2 million between March and July, and we had to adjust our budget after the year started to reflect that. So since that time, through the building of the current year's budget, we have had a reduction in personnel of 35 positions, and they're broken out here on the slide: 3 in administration, 27 in certificated staff, and 5 support staff. Now, some of these were generated, they were all generated because we were able to gain efficiencies in our staffing, and some of it was generated also or driven by enrollment changes. But we just wanted to show that, since we have been involved in the process of adjusting for state aid reductions and also for changes in enrollment, we have eliminated 35 positions from the budget over that period of time.
And that does represent about a 3 to 6%, depending on which unit you're looking at, reduction. Just as a comparison, probably the best example is to use, say, administrators and certificated staff. So the loss of 3 positions amongst 55, say, assignments or positions that the district had at the highest peak, since in July of 2018, is about 4.5%, 5% of that unit. The 27 certificated staff, the loss in there represents about, again, 4 to 5% amongst the 950 certificated staff members. So we've been proactively, as Amy was saying, as student enrollment has been shifting and we've been able to be more efficient. We have looked at all areas, including maintenance. Paraprofessionals aren't on there because it's harder to quantify, but we actually did eliminate lunch paraprofessional positions. They were part-time, so again, they're hard to quantify. But we have been looking to be more efficient in all personnel areas.
And we're going to continue to look at what we need for next year, the 2021 year, what our requirements will be based upon, things are listed at the bottom of this screen: student enrollment, course registrations at the middle and high school level, and what is required by IEPs and department and school needs that we identify. So this is still evolving. We're now going to talk more detail about the area of curriculum. So we'll turn that over to Kim Pekas and her colleagues.
So under the area of curriculum instruction, there is overlay here, Mr. Little, in terms of in some of that regular program instructions on the appropriation deck. When you take out the salaries, this is the remaining amounts that would make up some of those other areas. So these are all the materials, resources, programs that we offer and services to students. So we've kind of quantified here the major drivers to the area of curriculum instruction, keeping in mind that these are of high importance to the state and to the county when they're reviewing our budget. These are things that we must report on in our statement of priorities before the county, and then ultimately the NJDOE will approve the budget, in addition to items like facilities and plant operations. So looking at next year, the upcoming budget year, we will see an uptick in the amount of curriculum adoptions that will be required to be funded through the budget. This current year, we didn't have any major multi-grade adoptions to fund, or any significant core subject areas where large numbers of students participate. However, in our adoption cycle, looking at next year, we have one large multi-grade adoption, which is our elementary mathematics program. And I know Mr. Kerrigan's going to speak to some of the negotiations he's been doing with the different vendors. We've been aggressively negotiating the price of what that will cost, and if you want to speak to that process.
Sure. So as a committee, we've been reviewing various programs. For this school year, we have 2 pilot programs in place. The committee has been evaluating them on an ongoing basis. We're hoping to make a decision and recommendation this month. With that said, we've priced both programs out. Both programs came in at close to $1 million a piece, but in looking at the quotes and what's on them, we're looking carefully at not purchasing things we already have. Like, we don't need every single manipulative kit or center kit or posters. Like, some of the frilly stuff that we have already, we don't need to purchase again. So through that process of looking at things we don't necessarily need to purchase, and also through some fierce negotiation, kind of like buying a car, I was able to trim that quote down over $200,000 for now. And we're still looking at ways to drive that down further. So that is the driver here. And our current curriculum subscription does run out at the end of this year, so we do have to adopt a new program. It's not really an option at this time. So do understand that we are doing everything we can to bring that quote down as much as we can.
Mr. Berry, which pilots are those again?
We're piloting Envisions 2020 and Investigations 3. They're both Pearson products.
And that's for secondary?
K to 5.
So the other thing that Pearson has offered us is the option to do a split payment plan, kind of like where, and it's interest-free. That's one thing that Dr. Kerrigan was able to negotiate. They will allow us to do, like a 70% payment this year, deferring 30% of that cost to next year. It's something that we're considering. The only thing I draw your attention to is when the state aid cuts came in July of 2018, the bulk of the almost $1.1 million in reductions that we had to adjust our budget to balance did come from personnel cuts at that time. However, the rest of it came in mainly curriculum. And we deferred the adoption of our high school English curriculum resources at that time. So we would not have had about another $225,000 in English, high school English adoptions that we're looking at for next year if we hadn't done that, because we wound up splitting the 9th and 10th grade and 11th and 12th grade over 2 years and also deferred it a year. So that $225,000 that's also included in that a little bit more than $1 million in change over the years, over the 2-year period, does also reflect that finally completing that adoption that we deferred. We do have another major adoption in U.S. History 1, and that affects every freshman, every sophomore, typically 10th graders in our schools. I know Mrs. Morales, you wanted to speak to that.
So our committee of 4, counting me 5, have been looking at various programs. We've been comparing the cost of online programs versus traditional textbook programs. The textbook US 1 has used in the past, they really like. It's called The Americans. They no longer print that anymore with the changing times. They now only have an online platform. So right now, that's kind of in the lead, but there are several others we're still looking at. The cost for that platform for every 10th grader in the district for 5 years is approximately $93,000. And that includes all the teacher resources, all the student resources, a database full of primary source documents, even virtual reality experiences to see history kind of come to life. We do have to update this curriculum because the new standards, the social studies standards, are coming out. We already have a preview of them, but they're going to be released in full in the spring. So this is perfect timing for this committee because then they can just tweak based on the new standards. Should I address the key 5?
Do you want to, we have been talking as a department about the fact that, 10 years ago, you weren't talking about e-book subscriptions. You were talking about hard copy texts and the number of hard copy texts that you were purchasing. And hard copy text came with a little bit of a luxury in that if you had an uptick year and you wanted to defer maybe an adoption because there was no major changes to standards or you were happy with what you had, you were able to kind of hold off and you could continue to utilize that adoption, those resources without any additional cost to the budget or to the district. What the manufacturers, what the publishers have gone to are these e-subscriptions, and they make it very attractive for you to purchase them in lieu of the hard copy text. The e-subscriptions come with a final date. Typically it's a 5-year subscription. So you don't have that luxury of saying like, well, we'll just wait another year or 2, we like what we have, there haven't been any major changes. So we've been talking about, and the directors called a couple of the publishers to see, are we better off going back to hard copy text? Because you do have then that luxury of keeping the model. It's kind of like you own a car. You don't mind it, it has good mileage, it's doing well, so I'll just keep it. I'm not gonna trade it in for something new yet. The problem is they made it cost ineffective. Hard copy texts are running about 3 to 4 times more than ebook subscriptions. That means to break even, you'd have to be able to get a shelf life of about 20 years, 15 to 20 years out of those items, just to break even on cost. Because even if you resubscribe your 5-year subscription at about $100,000, over 20 years, it's going to cost you $400,000. Your initial payment on hard copy text, down payment, paid in full in year 1, is going to be about $300,000 to $400,000. And then you have to hope, again, to break even, that they're going to last for 15 to 20 years. So we have been weighing that very carefully. It's just, the publishers are really trying to discourage hard copy texts. And we still do purchase some. For many of our electives, we purchase hard copy texts. And even for the mass adoptions, we still purchase class sets because some students need the hard copy texts. They can't just rely on the e-subscriptions. But this is something that we've been debating fiercely.
And just to add to that, the e-books also have certain features for our special needs population. So the audio feature, they can hit play, they can listen to the textbook. They can click on words and it will say what the definition of the word is. It will allow them to magnify the text so they can see it better, all of which we know traditional textbooks can't do with that.
I have a question.
there's no way of negotiating an extra year or two, even with Carter, you can negotiate an extra year with this car.
We have not found any publishers who, there's no incentive for them to do that, so they're not offering it. Yeah.
Can students, any student get a hard copy book for courses, or are there a lot of courses where you can't get? If a student prefers to use a hard copy book, do they have access to those? Or how many classes would you estimate that they don't have?
Most of them have an accompanying hard text. Very few don't. Yeah, and we do purchase, like I said, when we do the ebook subscription adoptions, we do purchase at least one class set for every school or grade level.
But I mean, kids borrow them and come back.
Yes. Yep.
Now, we talked about what's in the budget. What is sitting outside of the budget right now in terms of things that, in other words, if you said, okay, we could defer those things that are coming up in the future years.
So what was originally in that budget was also about another $1 million for a K-5 social studies adoption. As Ms. Moran, I'll let you speak to that with the new standards coming out, but we decided to defer it. Obviously, we knew we were already looking at a very large multi-grade adoption, but we have deferred.
Yeah, we started with the committee piloting programs, but when we heard that the state was, going to take a while to release the standards, and then we considered the professional development involved in rolling out a math K-5 and a social studies K-5 the same year, when we know most of our K-5 teachers teach both. That's a lot to ask of our teachers as well. We know that the K-5 standards are going to be very different in social studies than the high school standards are. So the high school programs can just be slightly tweaked, where the K-5 is going to be a pretty big overhaul. It's focused more on civic education, which is great, but it's going to require a lot of changes. So we just thought it best to wait one more year, really commit to the math implementation, and then spend all of next year piloting programs for social studies to implement the following year, which the state did give us that year to implement the new standards. So we will still be on time from the state's perspective.
Well,
I don't think it's gonna be that high.
We've been aggressively
But,
negotiating that
yes.
as well. But the good thing is that we did revise and those are hyperlinked, so if anybody clicks on this, the two green items are hyperlinked. We've revised our current district curriculum cycle schedule to get us on pace so that large multi-grade adoptions do not happen more than one in a year. So by deferring the social studies, we thought that had a better impact, not only in our rolling it out, but also on the budget. It allows us to do an elementary math adoption this year, potentially a social studies adoption either next year or the following year, and then science will probably be soon right after that, because there'll be new science standards coming, and our subscription for STEM scopes will be expiring at the same time. So we're trying to spread this out efficiently as best as we can, those large adoptions. Mrs. Crusoe, do you want to speak to the world language adoptions? Because some of those are also large classes that large numbers of students enroll in.
I'm sure you probably suspect which languages are going to be the most expensive to adopt next year, whose subscriptions are up. Anybody want to guess? What our largest enrollments might be in? Excuse me? Spanish, yes. In particular, Spanish 2 is a very costly adoption compared to all the others, such as we have 7 new curricula in world language being written that have adoptions for next year, 7 different courses. AP Italian, for example, is small. There's not as many students in AP Italian as there are in Spanish 2. Spanish 2 is offered in all 5 secondary schools. It's offered in the 8th grades, in the middle schools, and it's also offered in the high schools. In addition to Spanish 2, last year we adopted a new Spanish 1 program, but we only adopted it for the high schools. They were using the old Spanish 1 program in the middle schools in the course that is entitled Spanish 7 and Spanish 8. That subscription ran out. So therefore, I either have to renew the old materials, or I have to go and adopt what we did for the high school, for the middle school choose, which is the smarter thing to do. So starting next year, I also have to purchase what was purchased for the high schools in Spanish 1 last year for use in the Spanish 7 and 8 classes at the middle school, because that is the equivalent of Spanish 1 in the middle school, so that it will flow for the students. So that's also a very costly adoption in comparison to the other ones that we're adopting next year. So we're also doing an adoption in advanced French A and in advanced French Spanish A. And for those of you who may not be aware from the curriculum guide, French A and Spanish A are technically 5th or 6th year French and Spanish classes. Students, we don't call it 5 and 6 because they can take them in any order. This is called French A and French B. It can be taken as 5, it can be taken as 6, so we just call them A and B, the same thing. But they're a smaller population because they're a more advanced class that goes on to those courses, so they're not as expensive either. Spanish 1 is expensive, Spanish 2 is expensive. We are also adopting French 1. That's not as costly as Spanish, but French 1 is taught in, again, in all 5 schools. The enrollment isn't as large as in Spanish, so the adoption is not as expensive, but it is time because the old program is now expired to adopt French 1 also. The other courses we're also writing that have adoptions are Italian 2, Latin 1, and I mentioned AP Italian. And again, those are smaller adoptions. If you want to know figures for that, Spanish 2 is $86,000. Spanish 1 for the middle schools is $84,000. Those are by far the largest adoptions. French is low 70s, 70-something thousand dollars, French 1. And the others are in the teens for the most part, as far as teens of thousands of dollars because they're smaller. Any questions about all of that?
What is the sign language?
Sign language for high school.
Sign language is something we put in the course selection guide for the high schools for this year. We need to see what kind of enrollments first, are coming in each high school as far as that goes, and then we will post for a sign language teacher and see how that plays out. Depending upon how we go in instruction, will determine the curriculum, whether we'll be writing one using somebody else's or whatever. So that's still up in the air because we're looking at enrollments first. So you have to stay tuned and we'll fill in more on that a little bit later.
When is that open, Barry?
Excuse me?
It would
Students are
start,
signing up as we
students
speak.
are signing up now.
Right.
They're expressing interest.
Right.
So we're trying to get an understanding of how many students we're talking about, in terms of the number of classes, sections that we would have to support.
Do you think it's something that's ever going to grow for elementary all the way down?
We were looking at both options, whether we should stay with the traditional languages at the elementary level or move towards a sign language curriculum. And, excuse me?
Wouldn't it be better for elementary to start with then?
Well,
So there's mixed research, there's mixed research and mixed reviews. And
there's
we've had-
pros and cons both ways, is what we're finding.
We've had lengthy conversations with our elementary administrators about this.
What do they?
The feeling, I know some of them are sitting back there. The overall feeling, Mr. Paulson, was at this point to stay with our current world language instruction at the elementary level.
Yes.
Which is Spanish, right?
Yes.
Yes, that was the consensus. And along that note, therefore, if we are staying with Spanish next year, that curriculum is due to be rewritten. So next year, the elementary Spanish curriculum will be revised. Okay. Hopefully to avoid some of the repetition that some people have commented on.
I'm loud enough, I don't talk. But we are talking about possible changes for the future, because there's changes to elementary specials that we're going to have to accommodate as new standards, and I'm just going to kick it back to Mrs. Morales at this point. There are new computer science and technology standards that are slated to be launched from the state next year or the following year. I'm trying to remember.
The following year.
The following year. I'm trying to keep them on track of them. So inevitably at the K-5, we're going to have to rethink our special subject offerings. So the consensus was to give ourselves another year to better plan for that and come up with a systematic approach, K-5, of what those offerings would look like once we have a better understanding of what the computer science technology standards will be and what our requirements, expectations will be for teaching students.
Plus, there's a new framework being adopted in the state of New Jersey for world languages in June. So we want to take a close look at that before we make a firm decision.
There's concern statewide that the new curricular frameworks for world language will require language immersion. And our concern is we wanted to wait to see what those requirements are going to be. We just want to make sure that American Sign Language would not be excluded from meeting the state standards for world language at the elementary level. We want to wait and see before we make any commitment, so that we don't make a commitment and then have to reverse course. So.
Is that the reason why the consensus was to stay with Spanish?
I think
That was one of the factors.
that was one of the factors. I think the other reason was there was strong consensus that language immersion also had benefit
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it at length at several of our meetings, and we felt right now where we were with the one more year on the curriculum that we had to be fiscally responsible to that. And then knowing that we had some changes coming down, we felt let's make sure we make a very educated decision rather than move forward. We all felt that it was a great idea. We talked about it at length at one of our meetings about, wow, like that would really open the doors for some of our kids. And I think Mary Pat's in the audience. I know she's one of our promoters of that. And it's something that if we can look into doing it, I think we would all be on board, but it's a matter of making sure that we wait for those timelines to come out.
It would be so different. We would be the first to be doing something.
Well, we wouldn't be the first. There are other districts who are currently doing it. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Without knowing
Holdsnack,
what those
Manalapan.
requirements are going to be, it's hard to make.
But again, we're waiting to see what the requirements are coming from the state, because if we move in that direction and then we can learn in the summer that sign language will not meet the criteria, then we'd be reversing course again, like we said. So we just want to make sure that when these new standards are launched, late spring, I think they're supposed to come, June, that gives us time to prepare and make it, like Mr. Paulson said, an informed decision.
How are we advertising the sign language for the high school?
Well, we're waiting to see how many courses, because we don't know if it's going to be part-time or full-time. We don't know if we have enough enrollment for multi-sections in both schools or single sessions.
No, I don't mean teacher-wise.
Oh.
I mean, how are we promoting it to the students?
Oh, it was in the course selection guide.
And the guidance department is.
Go ahead.
It is in the course selection guide with a description in the world language section of the guide, so that people will see it, and the guidance department is the one, or the ones who are sharing it.
When they had their
Because
meetings.
to be perfectly honest, guidance was very supportive of putting that in there and offering it, so they have been promoting it.
Yeah.
Because you know what, just putting it in the guide,
I agree.
the kids
Yep.
aren't gonna read it, and sometimes the parents don't really look at it, they leave it to the kids.
Yep.
There's
That's
gotta
where the
be a
guidance
way to
department came
promote
in.
it.
Yeah, that's why we had a very lengthy
That's not
meeting.
really accurate, because my daughter came home from South saying that was offered. She goes to the
No, I said some kids, I didn't say everybody, but there's a lot of,
Yeah, when
there's a
the-
lot of
It got
kids
around
out there
very
that don't.
quickly, because it is so novel. And-
Right,
and
and the
it
guidance-
did get around, students tell
It was
students.
discussed by our guidance counselor when she
Really
was
say
released.
it's two girls that read it?
My
Yeah.
boys, I don't know if they would have read it.
And I'm not saying that nobody, I'm
Most
not
of them
saying
didn't find
that,
out from reading it.
I'm not saying
one,
that
and it got around
guidance,
like wildfire,
Okay.
and the guidance department on top
I'm
of
not
it.
saying that guidance didn't do it, I wanna know that it's being done, because a lot of times in the past, a couple of years back, there's new, programs out there, nobody really knows what they need. So, you know, if we explain it to the kids and we intrigue their interest, you're gonna get more of a sign up.
Okay, so the next major area is classroom purchases. That area, that budget line encompasses most of our online subscriptions to things that are used on a daily basis in the classrooms. World Book subscriptions, Parrot Deck, Ed Puzzle, the list goes on and on, Raz Kids, that's K to 12. One of the areas that we looked at this year for redundancy or overlap was in our assessment system. With the full launch now of Linkit, 2 through 10, I would say, 2 through 12. 12th graders who are participating in courses, depending on what their coursework is, their schedule is. We realized that we were able to eliminate our subscription to middle school iReady for our general education classes. The information that we're getting from iReady seems to be redundant or overlaps with a lot of the data that we're getting out of Linkit. So we did eliminate that from the budget. In preparation for the new computer science standards, we did budget for additional software for coding with our elementary students. Supplies is a big area. I'll let Mrs. Orozco speak to the work that she's been doing with the elementary principals to again be more efficient in our use of science supplies.
So for the first 3 years of our implementation of our elementary science program, we bought full kits and full refill kits for every single classroom at the K-5 level that does science. And so now that the teachers have been using them and they know exactly what materials they need, we're actually putting the purchasing in the teachers' hands, and we're asking the principals and the teachers to work together to only reorder the supplies that they need, instead of receiving 2 very large bins each year that contain a number of supplies I'm pretty sure we could build a small village out of the amount of aluminum foil that we have right now. And so now teachers are able to better use those resources that they have and buy only what they need instead of get all of their materials refilled.
So going to the next, oh, sorry.
We don't have to go through the company to refill those kits, right?
No.
Because I remember like 5 years back, it was cotton balls and things that, you know, they only needed little things to refill them.
Yes, so we're not going through the company to do the refills anymore. We're leaving that up to the teachers.
So if you go to the next slide, the last two major areas that we wanted to cover under curriculum and instruction programs and services is staff development. Going back to that very first slide. Again, in our statement of priorities, we have to show where and how we've dedicated funds towards the professional development of our staff. There is an uptick this year, a slight uptick. It could have been larger, quite honestly, but we did realize some items that we've eliminated to account for the increased need in expanding our responsive classroom initiative. Ms. Orozco, do you want to speak to that?
So far we have been able to support 2 full trainings at the elementary level of responsive classroom through Title II funds. And this year we are budgeting for that through the curriculum funds. And we are hoping to train the same number of elementary teachers. And we're also planning a full pilot at least one of our middle schools for a middle school level responsive classroom training as well.
So those costs there, which again, about $100,000, represent the trainer's fees. That does not represent, it's an additional cost in salaries that's quantified in other line items that Amy referenced earlier for substitutes to have the teachers attend the trainings because they're typically 4-day trainings. It's 1 week. So it is a costly initiative. However, we do know that we've gotten very positive feedback from both parents, students, and staff, so 3 people, 3 different groups. And I know our principals too had it as one of their priority items when we met to talk about future professional development initiatives. So that is new. Again, partly we were able to defray the cost by eliminating other consultants and out-of-district presenters. We are eliminating a large chunk of our Teachers College Readers and Writers Workshop consultants and presenters. We're not going to be funding the Summer Homegrown Institute. That was something that we've excluded from the budget at this point in trying to narrow down that gap where we exist right now between revenue and expenses. We do have recurring costs that are in there every year. The reading and writing instruction that we do in-house, the Brookdale Math and Science Network, and other professional development initiatives that we do. I have to say, this amount, this $223,000, is very small for a district this large. However, we are constantly praised by the state for the fact that we have an outstanding staff who is able to support in-district job-embedded professional development and support each other as colleagues. So we're not spending a lot on out-of-district conferences, bringing in out-of-district presenters. We have significantly narrowed down that budget line because of really the quality of our staff and their ability to provide exceptional professional development in-house. One of the things I do want to mention is we do have, the reason why we have in there that additional new expense for elementary health and PE professional development, one of the things that the elementary principals have also been discussing at length is the fact that the state, as of this September, mandates that all 150 minutes of the required health and physical education minutes that students must get each week, and we define the week, it had now must be delivered by a certified health and phys ed teacher unless it was an elementary teacher with a K-5 cert that was issued prior to July 1st of last summer and who at one point had taught health or PE. So with that being said, what that means is we can no longer count our character education training like we do, the responsive classroom time towards that mandated 150 minutes. That does mean that we have to provide students with additional health and PE periods in their week. We've talked about many ways, we're still in conversation about how that's going to look, and in many ways we keep coming up against the problem, quite honestly, that is facility related. Mr. Paulson, Mr. Ferry, Ms. McCormick, do you want to speak to the issues as we try to come up with ways to address this state mandate in terms of the facilities?
Facilities is a major issue in some buildings and not in others. I could speak from my building. I mean, where we get strapped is when you have to require 150 minutes, because right now each block is 40 minutes. That aligns with some of the contract language for the bargaining unit. So you're going from 2 PE classes a week to 3, and then we're talking about some other innovative options where maybe a virtual type session could be incorporated into it to meet those requirements. And in my building, that would work out great because I have a pretty large APR. I can run lunches and also my gym classes if I schedule it effectively. But I know from my colleague at Port Monmouth, her space and my gym could actually accommodate if I needed two classes at one time, as can Mr. Ferry's, Mr. Leone's. But some of our facilities don't allow that, so in those cases, we've been really racking our brains, how are we going to do this?
So in a facility such as Port Monmouth, the APR is so small, and in addition to having lunch tables that pretty much take up about 7 feet along the back wall, it makes it difficult to have not only one full class, but impossible to consider having 2. So that's an obstacle in planning for 3 periods during the 5-day week.
So we're running against some problems in terms of how we're going to schedule those minutes. So we're trying to be creative at this point.
So the cost here, 8,000, 8,100 is for?
That's for the professional development for health and PE teachers to better train them on how they're going to provide additional instruction with the additional minutes they're going to have now with their students.
Will they have certificates after that?
They
So
already
that's
have
a
that.
piece of
You have to already be, so in the past,
I thought this was to get them
no, so in the past, we were able to meet the 150-minute weekly requirement by having 2, as Mr. Paulson said, dedicated health and PE periods with the health and PE teacher during their specials. That equaled 80 minutes. The other 70 minutes, go back about 3 or 4 years ago, the classroom teachers were doing 20 minutes a day of TDPE. Then the state 2 years ago put in the recess law. You could no longer double count TDPE against towards your 150 weekly minutes of health and PE, plus the new recess law mandate of 20 minutes a day. So all those teachers no longer were teaching technically health and PE as general ed teachers because we couldn't count those minutes towards health and PE. Anyone who now has been certificated, so teachers who have come online and finished their programs and been issued their certs, after, say, 2 years ago, have never taught health and PE in this district using their general ed cert, their class, their elementary cert. So under this new law, they're not even grandfathered, even if we wanted to go back to doing TDPE with classroom teachers to be able to do so. I hope it's
do we need? We have to add, obviously, to do that.
That's something we're working out. So, yeah.
Do we know how many certified we have?
Right now, we're doing some projections, and we're also considering ways in which, because we can define the week. So one of the things we have been discussing is possibly going to a 6-day week for specials, like an A through F day, because the 6-day rotation would allow us to get 3 days of health and PE. Because the other thing is we're trying not to negatively impact the minutes that students spend receiving art, music, world language instruction. We're trying not to significantly impact that by either eliminating one or putting them on, significant rotations at this point. So we're brainstorming. We're almost there.
This was like the problem we had a few years ago, trying to fit Spanish in.
Yes.
With the 6-day rotation in elementary school.
Correct.
And that was the issue.
Yeah. So that's why we are slating for some additional professional development with our health and PE staff. So that's curriculum and instruction. Any questions?
The next slide is just to give you an idea of what the schools are allocated out of our budget for things that they need immediately and specific to their building. The allocations that you see here are based upon, we use a system where we look at enrollments and we give an allocation based upon whether it's high school, middle school, or elementary level. Now, these amounts here are just to cover things that would be considered supplies, copy paper, other classroom supplies that they need, small equipment for their buildings, any building-specific professional development that they want to do. The principals use their discretion to allocate these funds. You know, we review it as a central office team, but these are the amounts that they're allowed to spend for their buildings. So all in total, it's about close to $1.1 million. These expenses are included in the category that you saw earlier where it said regular instructional expenses. They're included there. The allocations, the student enrollments include special education students that are in their buildings for the purposes of these allocations, but the special education classes also have additional budget accounts that are captured in special education areas to fund those particular expenses that are needed for them. So this just gives you an idea of overall, looking at our budget, it's a little over $1 million that are allocated specifically to the buildings for their needs.
So I'm sorry, what was that slide?
That's things like copy paper, other consumables for the classrooms, small equipment. Some principals, if they're able to use their funds efficiently enough, have even been able to, if they feel they have the ability to allocate funds toward technology, they'll do that. It could be for furniture, alternative furniture for the classrooms, things that would fall underneath the realm of a capital project or expenditure, but that they want to do for their buildings. So that's what these are used for. And like I said, any other specific professional development, we do a lot of district-wide professional development, but if there's something specific they want for their building, they can use these funds for that too.
The next slide we have here is for key items and significant changes in the curriculum technology budget account. The currently submitted budget actually falls 6% lower than what was approved in last year's budget. And here are some key notes, key items that are included in this budget. The first one are interactive flat panels. We're continuing to distribute interactive flat panels to replace existing smart boards that are either non-functional or extremely poorly functioning in many of our classrooms. We have some that are well over 12 years old now, and even with the shades closed and lights off, it's very difficult for the students to see what's being displayed on the board. The interactive flat panels were implemented last year in a number of our buildings. We met with great success, and in our budget meetings with our principals, it was 100%. Every single principal requested additional ones in their buildings. The second line item is for our Chromebook 101 initiative. We continue to replace and refresh Chromebooks as they become end of life. We continue to roll out in the 6th grade and 9th grade, and a lot of students to use them throughout their secondary schools. This year, we're also including a couple elementaries that was removed from our budget last year. We have a few schools where they have cards in the 3rd through 5th grade that are poorly functioning. We added this year to the budget AR, VR, augmented reality, virtual reality kits. We currently have VR kits in the district, one kit per school. Unfortunately, the devices in those kits are no longer supported. So software updates are no longer available, downloads are no longer available. So at this point, they're basically used for what they've been set up for a couple years ago. The implementation of these new AR, VR kits will distribute brand new kits to secondary schools and increase them from 15 units to 30. And then in the elementary schools, because the equipment, the goggles, and the peripherals are still functioning, we plan to just replace the devices. But also by putting new kits in the secondary schools, we'll be able to roll down existing goggles and accessories to the elementary schools, thus bringing those kits from 15 to 20 in each school. We have the graphic design lab in each of our high schools. We have 2 graphic design labs, one in High School North and one in High School South. The equipment is 5+ years at this point, and it's no longer able to support the software that's tied to the new curriculum for those classes. In comparison, the line below it is we're showing the labs, the hard arts lab the arts lab that we upgraded last year in 2 high schools. We're showing a significant cost difference of almost $20,000 because of the price decrease this year, and just being more efficient in the use of what technologies we'll be using in those labs. This is our last year for a technology lease payment. We used to have a 5 years rotating technology lease payment. Ms. Doherty and I have been working over the last 5 years to remove those leases. So this year, the lease payment will be $170,000 less. After this year, we will be lease free. And so the technology budget will be completely supported by our budget and not by any leases. I also like to add though, while we're removing the leases, we were able to still support services in the district. And from the first year of leases to now, the technology budget is over 24% lower than it was. So we were able to increase technology, continue to support, and remove those leases in the meantime. The last item is showing the wireless network upgrade we did last year, and that we do not have any major infrastructure upgrades this year. The board has gracefully approved many major infrastructure programs for the last few years, including the wireless access point project, switching project, new internal fiber connections, firewall, backup servers. So at this point, we do not have any major significant networking or infrastructure projects. Even if we did, being that's the last year of our E-rate funding, it would be fiscally responsible to delay them to next year when that E-rate funds become available again.
Hi, everyone. So when we look at the special education budget, these are the major components. I'll talk about a couple of identified areas of need. When we take a look at tuition, so this includes our out-of-district special education placements, as well as the county vocational tuition, and also some settlement agreements. You'll see the amount go down a little bit, although right below it in our next major area, our contracted services of speech, OT, PT, and related services. See the amount go up quite a bit. It's really just where the IDEA funds are put for our different special education services. Another important services are health-related services. That includes our one-to-one nursing, healthcare supplies for our nurses. Our CST purchase services, you'll see, went down a little bit. That's an area of identified need that we've spoken about this year. So the decrease comes from some CST outside services, evaluations done outside school that we're able to reduce a little bit, because we want to be able to include funds to have some inclusion facilitation professional services. That's someone coming in to help us expand our inclusive education. Also, an increase in our effective school solution services. So we are looking to begin it's a dual program of ESS, which focuses on the students' mental health needs and autism. So it's really an expansion of our current ESS high school program. An area of identified need that we discussed is expanding ESS to our middle and elementary levels. However, based on the budget, we're not planning on doing that next year. So overall, when you look at this, you'll see the amounts go up and down. The projected 2020, 2021, as you see on the screen, is $144, just over $144,000 less. The needs of the students are always changing, so our amounts are always fluctuating, but this gives you a general idea of how we're trying to meet all of the students' needs within the budget.
I have a couple questions. On the high school ESS, have we seen an incredible change?
Yes, absolutely. We've seen improvements in GPA, so of the students participating, their GPAs are going up. Their absenteeism is going down. It's saving the staff, that's our own staff, from having to pull students for counseling, because the ESS takes care of it. So we're seeing it as a very beneficial program, both to the students and also financially.
And about how much would it cost to put it into the middle school?
So to put it into the middle school, probably be about $200,000 for next year as a wraparound. It's definitely a goal, and it's always our goal to bring students back. That's a great way to fund it. If we're able to bring students back and we're able to lower the out-of-district tuition, we're able to expand and help more students with the same money. So it's definitely something we're working on.
And I was just curious, because it's been a couple of years now, and you don't really hear the talk. You know, it sounds like things have calmed down and things are, you know, the kids are getting the services that they need
And the therapists who run the ESS, they welcome visits. They love to have people come and hear about their program. I actually passed the therapist on my way in, and I was like, what are you doing here? And so they're doing parent meetings and parent training. So they're able to offer things outside contracted hours that maybe we wouldn't be able to offer ourselves.
The next area we're going to look at is facilities. The information that you see up here is broken down into, and this is exclusive of salaries, but the supplies and services and other purchases that we make in the facilities area. It's broken out by the way the Department of Ed budget breaks it out. There's actually 3 categories within facilities. There's required maintenance of buildings, there's custodial, and grounds. So the first 2 lines deal with the required maintenance for the buildings, cleaning, repair, maintenance services. We're looking at a decrease in that area for this year of a little over $300,000. Just to compare year to year, what we had last year, we did include in the budget some asbestos flooring removal in a few of our schools. We are not doing any removal of that magnitude in this year's budget, so that's one of the reasons why it's a decrease. We also did some major sidewalk work at Navesink last year that was in there. Along with our routine services, our routine maintenance services that we do, we have this year's budget really just includes primarily some additional painting in various buildings. We are doing some floor replacement in the pod at Ocean Avenue. It's non-asbestos, and some other minor repairs around the district. So the main reason for the change is that we did much more work in asbestos flooring removal last year that we're not going to be doing this year. Our maintenance supplies has remained relatively constant. As far as custodial and building purchase services, this area includes not only things directly related to our custodial operations, but it also includes our garbage and recycling contract, and that represents about $165,000 out of this $403,000. Our copier contract goes in there as a building service, so that, you know, those 2 items together make up more than half of what's in there. The rest of the contracts are things that we purchase for the support of the custodial operation. We have custodial supplies. Those are things in the buildings such as paper towels, toilet paper, cleaning, you know, those type of things our custodial staff uses. And we're not looking at a significant increase in that area, but we are looking to enhance, you know, what we're doing in that area. So we are investing in some different products and so forth. And when I finish going over this, I'm going to let Mr. Cahill talk about that. And then in the grounds department, we are looking at a bit of an increase because we want to, you know, we've been doing work on our fields over the past few years, and in relation to that, we want to increase the amount of seeding that we're doing to even get the grass growing more. And also, we've been trying to increase the amount of power washing we do the exterior of the building, so we want to continue to do that and you know, do that over the summer to make sure that the outside areas are clean and so forth. I'm going to let Mr. Cahill, our facilities director, talk a little bit about our general approach for next year's budget and some of the initiatives that he's looking at. So.
Amy, can I just say too much before to speak? I just want to know, can you explain the difference between maintenance supplies and custodial supplies?
Maintenance are things that We'll make it be easier if I start with custodial. Custodial is strictly what the custodians are doing, the cleaning and those type of functions. Maintenance would be things that are more like a preventative maintenance on our systems, repairs, things of that nature.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
if that helps you understand.
It does. It's like the air conditioning you're talking about.
Right,
things like
or
that.
if, or if something outside, if there's, for example, we have sometimes we have to make repairs to gutters, or we're doing some repair work next year to the cupolas on top of some of the buildings, like things like that would be more, that's maintenance, not custodial. Right.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, as far as the building maintenance, one of the important things that we're going to be focusing on routine maintenance-wise are the HVAC filters throughout the elementary schools and the secondary schools. The elementary schools, we're finding that as we get into them that they have permanent filters in them now that we're going to have to take those out and go back to disposables. We can't afford to replace the permanent filters at this point, but we're going to do a quarterly change, like you have in your house with a disposable filter. This way, we make sure that all the students and the teachers are getting all the air changes that are necessary. As far as the custodial supplies, we're looking at some big changes with the custodial department. We're going to be switching everything over to microfibers. They're just basic tools, but they're exceptional in what they do. Right now, we're using just regular brooms and terry cloth rags. They're just not efficient. So, if we give the custodians the right tools, I think we can get a lot more done with the manpower that we have. So we're actually in the process of we're going to start implementing some of this stuff this year, and then we're going to carry that over to next year's budget. And with the grounds department, some of the things that we're looking to do, like Ms. Doherty said, with the seed, but we're also looking to enhance our fertilization, our weed control, and with the power washing. With that done right, we need additional cleansers and soaps and things like that, because our plan is to work alongside with a contractor, so we can kind of double what we've done last year. And my intention is I'm requesting a commercial power washer, so that once we get a feel for the scope and we can kind of watch the contractors and learn some of the techniques, I'm hopeful that going forward we'll just take that on as a project that we'll do in-house, and we won't have to seek outside help going forward with that. So those are some of the additional things that would add to the cost.
To the next slide.
Can I just ask a couple questions? When you're recommending these repairs, how do you recommend one school over another? Like, say, the floor replacements. How do you decide who's getting the floor replacement?
Well, you talked about the Ocean Avenue pod.
Well, I'm not pointing to one school. I'm asking you, when you're recommending floor replacements, how do you recommend what school is going to get that floor replacement?
The decision's usually pretty easy because they're failed. The pod at Ocean Avenue, you could walk through, and if you pulled one tile up, you could pull the whole pod up with your hand. And we have some floors at High School South that are just worn. They're no longer serviceable. We can't scrub them anymore. We can't put floor finish on them. Once they get to the point where they're failed, that they rise right to the top. But those are two examples that we have.
We're also doing a little bit of floor work at River Plaza. It was lesser in scope than the Ocean Avenue pod, but that's something I mentioned.
The reason I'm asking is because we went to an event, some of us at Port Monmouth the other night, and those floors are in really bad shape. And I can't remember the last time that we put money into those floors. So I'm wondering, are the other schools in worse shape than that? You know, how do they not get on, how do they get on the list for their floors to be repaired?
Okay, well, at Port Monmouth, the floors are still intact, and I was there this summer, and I see what you're talking about, but I think a lot of that, with the new chemicals, the new products that we're gonna have for floor care, are gonna address a lot of what you see. A lot of it just needs a real good deep clean, and I think that...
Oh, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, well, we did a lot. I'm sure if, you know, I could walk through there and show you some of the stuff that we did. And we plan on expanding on that this summer at all schools, but Port Monmouth especially.
Yeah, I'm using Port Monmouth especially, but, you know, I'm sure there are other schools that might be in the same boat. And I was just really curious, how do they get on the list? Like, when is it, you know, how do you know who needs it more than?
Well, as we go through, we have Joe Haig, who does he does quarterly floor inspections, mainly looking for cracked asbestos floor tiles. But as he's doing that, he identifies any floor that's failing and makes note of it, and then we come out and we evaluate if it's something that we can repair immediately. You know, a lot of times if there's just a couple tiles, we can, you know, take them out of stock or purchase them, make a repair. Sometimes it's, you know, really large areas that you just can't take on during the school year, such as the you know, the areas we're talking about. But some of the other areas at Nut Swamp, we have some the kitchen area and closet spaces. They have to be replaced. So if we can't keep them clean and you know, we can't keep them adhered to the subsurface, then we're you know, those are immediate, and we right now don't have the funds to just selectively say, you know, we don't like the color, or you know, it's a little worn, let's replace it. You know, we're replacing them as they fail, and we're doing our absolute best to keep the old stuff shining and clean. And
Do we do the same for painting?
Well, yeah, I think if you...
Do we have a schedule of, you know, painting the schools, or do we just wait and...
No, I do. When I took over, I sent a request out to all principals with their priority list for the next 5 years going forward on what they would like to see, and I'm incorporating that, and I did a lot of it last summer, and I plan on working off of that existing list. I haven't even requested out to the principals, you know, on what their needs are painting-wise. When I put that out to them, I explained to them I was going to use that going forward, and you know, as we continue along, you know, in another year or two, I'll ask them for another update. But I have quite a bit of painting already to...
And I mean, I get we're in a budget crunch here, but our kids are in those buildings every day. You know, we really got to look at stuff like that. You know?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that if you haven't seen it yet, you'll see some great improvements, because we're really working hard in those directions. The things that can be done, and you know, sometimes it's elbow grease and some paint, but it goes a long way.
No, that's my thought. You know, at looking at some of the stuff in the different buildings, it looks like it could be done in-house with some, you know, elbow grease and just a little bit of extra.
I agree 100%.
Paint and cleaner.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and that's our plan.
I'd have to say though, I was in two buildings this week alone, and especially at the beginning of the year, we heard as an administrative team a lot of very positive feedback, Walter, about those upgrades, and we have heard that continuously, and so we do appreciate your efforts.
My point is, I just want to see it happen all over, you know, because our kids are there. You know, they deserve a clean, bright atmosphere to learn. So I'm just curious how we get on the schedule and we make sure that everybody is getting, you know, a piece of the pie. Because everybody in the district deserves that.
We all want that.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
The next slide shows our amounts that we have projected for the various utilities that the district uses, water and sewer, gas and electricity. Water and sewer, we are projecting somewhat of an increase. As I mentioned before, we have been focusing on improving the condition of our fields across the district over the last few years, and we have realized some increased water consumption from that. Our gas, we're keeping that level. We have found that what we have budgeted for this year seems that it will be sufficient for next year. And in the area of electricity, we've continued to reduce the amount that we budgeted for electricity. For those of you who may not be familiar, the district undertook a couple of years ago an energy savings improvement plan, and we did district-wide measures to gain some energy efficiencies. And we also built in some projects that we needed done that may not be energy efficient, but things that need to be done, such as ceiling replacements and some other improvements that we made. But overall, and that project included the solar panels that went on the buildings and the updating of some of our equipment and a district-wide lighting replacement to LEDs so that we would gain efficiency there. So even before 2019-20, going back a few years, our amount that we budgeted for electricity was around $2 million. At this point, we're down to about 1.3. We're hoping that we even come in under that. This is our first full year. Well, last year was our first full year of having the solar panels fully operational. So, again, this is only our second year. We want to see what the trend is, but we feel very comfortable reducing it to the 1.3, and we're hoping we might be able to do better. But, compared to a few years ago, we're down to $700,000, which we think is positive. So that just gives you an idea of where we stand with utilities. The next slide breaks down our transportation budget. We have, now this is exclusive of salaries, these are all the contracted services that we pay for. All of our busing is contracted. We do not own any buses here in the district. The first line represents what's called aid in lieu for non-public students. If we are not able to secure transportation for them, which is within the financial limits that the state sets for running a route, basically, if the route is going to cost more than if you divide up the route cost by the students on the bus, that's more than $1,000 per student, the state then says that we should pay them aid in lieu of getting a bus. So, there's a sort of a cap on those costs that we would spend on a bus. So we have budgeted $160,000 for that. The rest of the items you see here are contracted services for our home and school, back and forth routes, our special education routes that are within the district and out of district. We have athletics. We have contracted services that we run through the Monmouth Ocean Educational Services Commission. We have other contracted services that we include in here that would be for community trips, alternative and special ed trips, things of that nature. Overall, we're showing an increase of $709,000 in transportation. But now, just keep in mind also that our transportation budget is offset by the revenue we spoke about earlier, the fees that we're generating by sharing some of these routes with other districts, that $800,000 that we have budgeted on the revenue side. So even netting that out for both years, we are still experiencing a bit of an increase in transportation. One of the areas that we're focusing on, and we're actually just had a meeting on it yesterday, is athletic transportation. Although it's not the biggest component of this transportation budget, it is one that is throwing off an increase for this year, and and for next year, and that's become something that's become more costly. It's gone up a few $100,000 over the past few years because of the demand for the buses and the prices that the busing companies are charging. But in transportation in general, in case anybody has not been at a previous presentation, has become more difficult. There's been a shortage of drivers over the past few years, which makes it difficult for the bus companies. There have even been a couple of local companies that have gone out of business. The demand for transportation is great, and all of the schools are basically running the same approximate schedules. Everybody wants the buses at the same time. Fortunately, in Middletown, we're large enough that we do get on our regular routes. We always get a lot of participation from bidders, and we're able to keep those costs relatively constant. But on these extra things that we do, or these out-of-district routes that we do, a lot of times we'll find that the cost will be going up. And so we've been working on this area, particularly in athletics, working on ways to address it. We met with the athletic director and his assistant and our transportation department, and we're reaching out to other districts to try to find ways to not make the increase continue to grow as it has over the last few years. But it's just, it's very difficult, and all the districts are in the same boat. We talked to a bunch of them today. We had another meeting to do some more combinations of routes, and this is not unique to Middletown. So again, it's sort of I would say probably a statewide problem. We know it's definitely a countywide problem, and we're looking at it. But in the other areas, we are doing what we can to make sure the routes are efficient, share with other districts, and control our costs that way. The next slide deals with the items that right now we have in the area of capital outlay. Capital outlay is a section of the budget that deals with equipment that's going to be larger purchases, generally over $2,000, or projects, capital projects, facilities projects for the district. We have a list of equipment listed here in various areas, some educational, some facilities related. We always include an allowance for special education equipment. You'll see that at the bottom. Because they're things that are required by IEP, we have to have an allowance for to purchase during the year that may cost over $2,000. So the items that we also, our copier lease is listed here. That's something that we have to include because we have a 5-year agreement for all of the copiers throughout the district. So these are the areas the items that we're looking at right now. Again, everything is still under review and subject to change, but it's about $312,000 worth of equipment, but again, 115 of that is really non-negotiable because we have a lease for the copiers. As you go to the next slide, these are some of the projects that we're looking at as far as the capital projects go for this year. Again, this list is not finalized by any means. It's subject to change, but just to give you an idea of some of the projects that we're looking to do next year. The most significant one is we have replaced all the roofs across the district over the past several years. They're all, I don't think any of them is more than 5 years old at this point. But when we were doing the roof replacement at Fairview, there's a section of that roof that was slate. And we did not replace it at the time. We didn't have any issues with it, and aesthetically, it looked nice. So we kept that part of the roof, but now unfortunately we are having issues with it, and we are looking to repair and replace that section of the roof at Fairview. The other items are pretty self-explanatory. Some of the larger items on here are the PA and clock systems and for Thorne, and also the clock system at Thompson. Just one note that I'll make here, at least the PA part of the items at Thorne, we could possibly, we're also evaluating where we've been allocated $565,000, or $535 or $565 of security funds. I don't know if you've heard that through the state, the Securing Our Children's Future, and these are funds that we can use for security projects, and we'll be trying to make decisions on those over the next few months. We could possibly pull out things like the PA system at Thorne as a security project and use those funds for it, but the clock systems wouldn't be eligible for that. So again, this list is pretty self-explanatory, but again, we are still reviewing it. We're looking at it. This list is subject to change. We may be taking things off or changing what is on here depending upon where we go with the finalization of the budget. Walter, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that.
No. If anyone has a question about any of the projects listed, I'd be more than happy to answer. Middletown Village, the sidewalk extension there was requested by the police department. It makes sense. It's an area that extends from the current main entrance to Kings Highway. Right now, there's actually no sidewalk that connects out to where the crossing guard is. So, after speaking with the principal and looking at it, it just really makes sense. And it's something that probably should have been done, quite some time ago. But everything else on here, I think, is self-explanatory. Bayview, the fence install at Bayview School. They're having some runners, some kids that are just getting on the playground, and there's concern there. So we're looking to we haven't figured out exactly where the fence is going to go, but we need to protect it so that the children don't run out onto Runnable Road.
And just a reminder, we talked about before, the items on this list would be items that we would be taking out of our capital reserve. So that revenue and these projects go hand in hand. If we take items off of this list, it will reduce the amount we take out of capital reserve, but it won't reduce the amount available for the general budget. So these items are more of a decision on, maybe what the cost would be, fine-tuning that, and also, if we feel that something else would take priority. But eliminating these things won't free up money in the budget for, other general operating expenses. The next slide we have is all of our athletics, co-curricular, and other instructional programs. This is a summary of those areas. As far as the co-curricular activities at the high school and middle school level, these expenses are mainly made up of the stipends for the various clubs and activities that we have. We don't anticipate a significant change there. In athletics, again, a lot of that are the coaching stipends, but also purchases of supplies and some equipment. A couple of the major differences between last year's budget and this year's budget and the proposed budget. There is a band uniform purchase for high school north budgeted of about $25,000. We've also included one additional coach at each middle school at the request of the athletic director and also the principals of the middle schools to facilitate the sports in those schools. They think they won't all be using it for the same thing. I think one of the schools might want to use it for wrestling, and another one, they will decide which sport that they need that for. The regular.
Do we not have coaches there now?
No, there's coaches. These are additional coaches.
To be like assistant coaches?
Increase in size of teams, yeah. Concerned with supervision and the increase in size of teams.
The track program is extremely large in 2 of our schools, and the wrestling program has expanded. So there's need for that additional coach for safety and supervision reasons.
And the other regular educational programs, $190,000, that's made up of our before and after school and summer programs, K-12, SOAR, and Jumpstart, and things of that nature. So that's it. And we only anticipate a change in that budget. So altogether, that approximates $2.5 million for next year. So that brings us to the end of all of our information. We wanted to let you know what comes next. So what comes next is the administrative team. We will be continuing, obviously, to work on a plan to balance next year's budget because we are not there yet. All of the budget areas will remain under review, subject to change. There are some things that we are looking at, but as you can see by going through all this, unfortunately, there's not, any large items included in the budget that we can just decide to defer or take out. There's no major capital improvements that are being funded. There's not, additional staff being proposed. it's really, and we have taken quite a few things out, trying to and refine and get down to where we are now. And now, of course, we're going to have to bring it down so there's no gap between the revenues and expenses. Our next public budget meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, March 4th. In the month between now and then, we will be continuing to work. We will be also having some committee meetings with the board to review these items in even more depth, these areas. We do have to have our tentative budget approved by March 20th and submitted to the county office. We're scheduled to approve it March 18th at our March board meeting. And the public hearing and adoption of the final budget must be done between April 24th and May 7th. So we will be determining a date for that meeting as well. Our April voting meeting, I believe, is April 22nd, and it doesn't fall within that time frame. So we know it's a lot of information we presented this evening to all of you. We will be, of course, if there's any other questions at this point, and we will be, like I said, meeting with the board and committee and working as a team and having another public meeting at the beginning of March. Hopefully by then we'll have our state aid number, although we don't anticipate any real change from what we're proposing or projecting. But we do hope that we have some more information that will help us get to where we need to be. Yes. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Questions?
Dr. George, before we get to agenda item 8, which is open to the public on agenda items only, I'm wondering if this is the appropriate time to make a motion to take action on our executive session discussion on the change of health insurance brokers. Is it, I'm just checking with council, is it? So I'd like to make a motion and add this to the agenda, that we move to change our health insurance broker to Arthur Gallagher and Associates.
Second.
Discussion?
You caught me by surprise here.
You gotta stay on your toes there, George.
Okay, so that's Mr. DeFranco and Mrs. Caminiti. Okay. Any discussion amongst the board?
Discussion? Okay.
Roll call. Mrs. Caminiti?
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco?
Yes.
Mr. Donlin?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mrs. Minuis?
Yes.
Mrs. Wright?
I'm going to abstain.
Mrs. Stella?
Yes.
Mrs. Rogers?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. The board has appointed Gallagher Benefits as the health insurance broker, and I assume that you're authorizing us to start effectuating that change?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to open the microphone to public comment.
Hi, Rachel Kanaka. I just have a couple of questions or comments on some of the budget information, so it's going to be all over the place, and I'll try to go fast. Is it the 3-minute rule? Is that in effect? Yes? Okay. One question on the ESSA grant money that we get, is that completely independent of any other state aid money we get?
Yes.
Okay, so even if we, no matter what happens with the state aid number, that money is totally separate?
Right, but it can vary.
Okay, and it's supplemental, I understand. Okay. My next question about some of the curriculum stuff with the materials for the classrooms. For the things that we have in print currently, but we don't have digital subscriptions for, are we legally permitted to scan the hard copies and be able to distribute them out? No, okay. Well, that might be a quick way to do it. When it comes to buying the curriculum stuff, do you guys work with other districts? Can you clump together and go after the Pearson math curriculum for K to 5 as a clump, as a unit, a multi-district unit to buy, or no?
If we were smaller, that would make sense to do it as a consortium, but the quantity at which we're already purchasing puts us at an advantage.
Okay, we're all ready. But if we were to combine with another larger district and really be big, is that a possible way to get some cost savings on some of these things we know we want to do?
No, I don't think it's correct.
It might not be legal.
You know what it is? It doesn't work to their benefit.
Okay.
And the pricing index and supply is such, and demand is such, that they're not willing to negotiate beyond what we already are able to.
You're already at the basically highest.
Yeah.
Yeah, discount you can get, okay. One of the, I only thought of it because we talked about the sign language in elementary. I know this came up a little bit during strategic planning. Is there a discussion about bringing more formal typing instruction into the elementary schools at a younger grade, like when you're handing the kids the one-to-one Chromebooks?
That's okay. You should speak loud enough, but we have tried that in the past. Probably about 5-6 years ago. We did Type to Learn, I believe it was, in the elementary level.
Typing club.
Typing club. There were all different ones that we tried the software. It is difficult to manage in the at the classroom level. That is something that we're aware of, that as we're waiting to see what the new technology and computer science standards, and the principals in the back will attest, we've been talking about that. Likely that not in the next year's school year, but the following year, we're going to have to account for that being a cycle course, a special course.
Oh, good. Okay.
And then that would be, we're anticipating that that's going to be part of the potential state framework for the curriculum.
So cycle in 6th grade or cycle earlier on?
No, well, it depends on where the standard, we're waiting to see what the standards release is going to be. Mrs. Rouse, do you want to speak to anything specific?
I mean, I think you covered it, but once we see the standards and what grade bands, how they're separated, we can kind of hone in on which skills and which grades the students are going to need to have. So maybe like K1 will focus more on the typing, maybe 4 or 5 will be more on the programming.
Okay.
So then we're going to have to take a look at that and see if it does need to be a standalone kind of part of the rotation, a special.
Okay, just as a little focus group of just my daughters, I have twins, and they had different teachers all through elementary school. One of them, teacher really pushed typing club, and the other one didn't. My typing club kid can type like a professional. I mean, the quickness that she can do her homework is amazing. My other one is still a hunt and pecker, and it's just, as you move on through life, it's such a simple skill, but it makes such a difference.
I just want to let you know we're out of time, so if you want to just wrap that up. And if you have additional questions, I'm sure administration outside of this public comment can, respond to you at that point.
Okay, so sit down. Okay, my last thing then, this is just a comment and not something I'm recommending. I'm just curious if there are other districts in the state that do not apply for state aid. I know it's a big chunk of our budget in terms of dollars, but on a percentage base, we're at about 10 million, or 10% rather, and it's getting smaller as time goes on. Would there ever be, in the future, an appetite for foregoing state aid entirely? I imagine it would relieve us of a lot of obligations that we currently have. And would that ever be something worth considering longer term, so that we're not beholden to the state, especially as the number keeps going down? So just something to think about. That's it, thank you.
Hi, Pierre Staking out of town. The pension payment, is that in here, or have we already accrued our last bit?
No, this current budget covered the third installment to accrue a 5-year.
Okay, so that's third, so is that under employee benefit line as well?
That would be under employee benefits.
Okay, and then we have 2 more years after that as well.
Right.
It's around 700,000?
It's about 763,000.
Okay.
And we have not been billed for any of that to this point. The money's been set aside.
Right. Also, just from a county perspective, when we start talking about being able to combine service, what does the county level do for us? Is there anything they do, like when we talk about, I mean, I know we're the largest district in our county, but when you talk about buying these $1 million pieces of curriculum and things like that.
Well, we do participate in various purchasing cooperatives. Some of them are county-based, some of them are statewide, some of them are regional, multi-state cooperatives. As far as, we did reference when we were talking about transportation, we do utilize, the MOESC, which they not only do transportation services, but they do educational services and so forth that we utilize. But the county, most of it is in the purchasing cooperatives that we participate in. We do also work with other districts, like we mentioned, that we bring, we allow some districts to send students to our district for certain programs, and we will also utilize certain programs of other districts. The county, that would be something that would be organized more at our level and not at a countywide level. But there is cooperative purchasing and going on, between the districts individually, at the county level, the state level, at all different levels.
All right. And on revenue sources, I know I talked about this a little bit before, but are we looking at, I mean, even like our facility rentals? I mean, there's a big difference between a Rally Cap Sports that charges their participants $20 for 10 sessions versus maybe a coach that is charging $200 and using students as volunteers. I mean, are we looking at what we're charging people for our facilities? I know you have some sort of hierarchy, but is that outdated?
There is a policy and regulation 7510 that deals with the use of facilities. So
that's state regulation. That's a state regulation.
No, that's our policy.
So we can change that.
We can change it. We do, just to reference, you mentioned, coaches running camps. Those situations are considered already class 3 users where they are charged a higher rental, but the rental that we collect then goes back into various student activity funds here to support. We have had discussions about that. It's not, the other flip side of it is these are viewed as community buildings. And so where we have groups that are community-based groups, that it's not looked upon favorably to increase.
I know, but I mean, we keep hearing
You're
about
actually out of time at this.
It is something, to answer your question, it is something we look at, it's something we can
I'm
continue
just trying to
to
feel
discuss.
the urgency. We hear about these cuts, and it's.
Again, this time is for comments, not a back and forth. Thank you.
I understand what Council just said. I just want to add something, Ms. Piasecki. We've discussed that exact topic not only within the board, but also with the township as part of shared services, because, using our facilities would include using our fields or gyms or basketball courts, things like that. So, Mrs. Doherty is exactly right. There is a very strong pushback from the township because they do view these buildings as taxpayer funded already, and so if a community organization wants to use one of our buildings, they feel it's essentially public taxing to charge a community organization market rate for the building. Whether or not all of us on the board necessarily agree with that, that's not up to get from the township to discuss that.
I'll ask the question, how much we're talking about, right? Like, I'm sure some of these programs do very well, some of these go front of the run, but I mean, there's still not $1 million, right?
No.
You look at the field, it's like $35,000 contract.
Right, I mean, I
You're
don't.
saying that about everything. It's not really costing us much. We're supposed to.
No, what I'm saying is like, how much do you think the coaches are making? These programs you're talking about, I'm saying that not millions of dollars.
I just threw that
This
out.
would be a time for back and forth, so I would recommend that the board not engage.
I just want to make a comment. I brought that up at the last board meeting, and maybe we're on the same page, maybe we're not. There are groups that are renting our facilities that are not the percentage of Middletown students that it should be. So that's really not a community organization. Those are the things that I requested that we start looking at, because if they are, maybe they are our coaches, but they're running a camp for kids all over Monmouth County, and maybe only 15% of them are from Middletown. That puts them in a different class of renting, and we should be getting more money from that.
We have Janet Dillett looking into that for us. We talked about it at shared services, so that's something to address shared services.
And the issue with that was that would potentially put us in a position of having to sort of quiz or include in the registration form, well, where do you live? And the township again felt that was not the approach they wanted us to be taking, to say, well, you're a Middletown person, you're not a Middletown person. So it's from a PR perspective, it's a tough line to walk. But I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that was
And
part of
I
the discussion.
wouldn't want to turn one Middletown kid away, but the bottom line is, maybe we need to find out what they're charging each parent, and then it's worth looking into, because I think you had that discussion last year too. The parents are being charged, say for example, they were saying $200, and it's only costing $50 to run the program. Then this organization is making $150 off each kid, for example. that's not fair. We should be getting rental off of that. Because, I mean, we're in a budget crisis. We need to be doing the right thing. If it's our kids, then it's our kids. But if it's not our kids, then we deserve to have that rental fee.
Eric Lucchese, Nexus. I just had a couple of questions. You had talked about the e-online subscriptions that were expiring for the elementary grades. Does that include like Dreambox and Raz Kids?
Those are annual renewals.
Annual renewals. And are those requirements of the New Jersey state run standards?
The resources are at the discretion of the district.
Okay.
So we're still in the midst of actually, you're all shaking their heads at me, we're actually meeting to review our annual subscriptions to make some decisions on those.
Okay. Do we know about how much those cost annually?
It was up there. It's under the, I don't have it in front of me. It was the third category down.
Right.
It says online subscriptions. There's a total there for all that.
We don't know if they're individually the Dreambox or the Raz Kids.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. And as far as you had talked about, this state might change the specials requirements, and that there will be, do you know when that change comes usually, at what time of year?
We're expecting new curricular frameworks to come out in June.
All right, thank you.
Becky Soden from Navy. So over the course of the year, you've seen fourth grade class sizes rise in some of the schools to what I would say is an unacceptable level of 27. And I just had listened to somebody say that the teams, some of the teams grew and the coaches required or requested additional coaches. How is it possible that you can justify finding coaches but not teachers for the actual academic instruction? I'm really flabbergasted that you can find coaches, 3 more coaches, but yet you're saying these kids have to have class sizes of 27 and you're not able to find the teachers for that. To me, it sounds like our priorities are a little bit out of line. And before I heard that, one of the other things I was going to say is that the budget for athletics is, well, last year it was 1.6, now it's 1.7 million. That, if you average out, say, teachers about 100,000, is 17 or so teachers. I mean, if we have monetary constraints, we have to pick our priorities and decide what's more important. Is it more important that our students, all of our students, get a good education, or is it more important that we pay for them to play sports? There are other ways for students to play sports besides having the schools pay for them. I mean, that's a huge chunk of money that we could get and put into the actual academic education of the students right there. That's all I'm going to say. I know it's not going to be a popular thing because I know how much sports are admired here in Middletown, but when you don't have enough money, you have to make cuts and you have to set your priorities and make choices. And that's, to me, an easy choice right there. And then on top of the Dreambox, I know Dreambox is about, costs us annually about the salary of the teacher. I don't think Dreambox has any value to the students at all. I think it takes away from the education. I think they're better off working with actual materials and working with other students than staring at a screen where we get more time. And you could get quite a bit of money out of that as well and help balance the budget.
Okay, seeing no one else come to the mic, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
I